Emily Kohrs spoke to NBC's Blaine Alexander about the list of indictments the jury recommended.
It's not a short list.
So we're talking about more than a dozen people?
I would say that, yes.
Are these recognizable names, names that people would know?
There are certainly names that you would recognize, yes.
She would not say whether that includes the former president, but did say this.
I don't think that there are any giant plot twists coming. I don't think that there are any, giant, that's not the way I expected this to go at all. I don't think that's in store for anyone.
The jury forewoman on that Georgia special grand jury has a lot to say about former President Trump and the investigation tonight.
We definitely heard a lot about former President Trump, and we definitely discussed him a lot in the room. When this list comes out, there are no major plot twists waiting for you.
And the fact that she said there's no plot twists is so exciting to me. I got an HBO Max account, I got Netflix, I have plenty of plot twists. The fact that democracy might be boring is frankly the biggest tease you could have.
I will be frustrated if nothing happens. This was too much information, too much of my time, too much of everyone's time, too much of their time, too much argument in court about getting people to appear before us. There was just too much for this to just be, oh, okay, we're good, bye.
And if it was just a perjury charge, or perjury charges, would that be acceptable to you?
That's fine. I will be happy as long as something happens.
I mean, it was 8 months of her life. I don't blame her.
That's a lot of time to put into it. It feels like, the last 4 years sometimes feels like the last 16 years in many people's lives.
Your thoughts, Mark?
One of the things that strikes me about her, she's so sort of naively, sort of wonderfully innocent about how excited she is about talking to the press about this.
So, yes, absolutely right. She's talking out of school. It's not good for the case. But man, we're going to have, for the first time in the history of the country, a Fulton County DA is going to indict not just Trump, but almost certainly, it seems to me, Mark Meadows, maybe John Eastman, Rudy Giuliani. This is the huge event people have been clamoring for a year.
Is it, would you say, when it comes to, there are indictments recommended, of course. Is it
Yes.
more than 12 people? Is it more than 20 people?
I think if you look at the page numbers of the report, there's about 6 pages in the middle that got cut out. Allow for spacing. It's not a short list.
Not a short list. More, when it comes to 75 witnesses, it's not, I assume, of course, it's not 75 people. Would you characterize it as 20-ish people? I
can't say I counted.
Okay. More than a dozen, though, I think I'd heard you say in another interview?
I believe so. That's probably a good assumption.
So when I think about Donald Trump and indictments, I think about someone who has gotten away with a lot. It really doesn't matter what people's feelings are, really, on the right. It just can't matter. At some point, something's got to stick. Better now than any time, here we are.
What's going to happen now? She's speaking, you said that she could be in deep water with the judge, meaning what? What could...
McBurney will say, he told them, look, you shouldn't really be saying anything that's not published. And she's being very cutesy and saying all kinds of things. She's giving the basic numbers. She's coming close to giving the names, etc. Now, it's not against the law. He won't throw her in jail, but he could really hammer her and say you're violating the court's orders. It is not good what she's doing. And in fact, it could harm the case.
Trina, what happens? Donald Trump is running for president again.
What does happen? Look, first of all, half of us, let's just say half of us, believe that he is a criminal, right? So we have a criminal running for office. If you're 1 out of 2 Americans, you don't believe anything that the man has claimed to be truth. And unfortunately, we're looking at a situation where we might have a convicted criminal running for office. Ask the right.
Yes, and to your point, Mike, that might, the people that you talk to, that wouldn't be a deterrent.
No, again, the people I talked to wouldn't be a deterrent. And to your point, a few moments ago, you said it's not about feelings. There's a lot of people in this country that believe that because of the Hunter Biden thing, that Joe Biden's a criminal. That doesn't make it true. That doesn't make it convictable, and it doesn't mean that he shouldn't be the president of the United States.
There's no constitutional reason why the president can't run with an ankle bracelet and from jail. It's just crazy. But if the 32% stay with him, et cetera, and he becomes the nominee and he's a convicted criminal, that's what the framers had in mind.
This jury only makes a recommendation, but yet, Stephanie, I am deeply troubled by the fact that this much disclosure is going on in this process, and I think it has legal ramifications. I think this young woman means well, but I also think she does not understand the repercussions here. I would not be surprised if we see a judge come in and admonish the remainder of this special grand jury that he's heard enough of them speaking publicly.
But I have to say, as Frank suggested, very unwise. I think it potentially could be used by the defense in a motion. They could argue that the jury's pool has been tainted. They could argue that this is, I think, evidence of a prejudice against them. I don't see any upside here, and I think it creates a bit of a spectacle and a concern that the rights of potential defendants or people who aren't even indicted or won't be indicted are potentially impacted. So I think it's unwise and unfortunate.
I'm concerned that we may see a tainted grand jury pool. So, for example, if you're picking your grand jury, wouldn't you ask them, have you heard what this woman has said, this foreperson of the special grand jury? Yeah, I heard she said Rudy Giuliani was truthful. Well, that's not helpful if there's an intent to indict Rudy Giuliani. How about federally? She'll be the first witness called by Rudy Giuliani to defend him.
Maybe, perhaps. I mean, look, she certainly seems like she's teasing that, stay tuned, that something is coming related to him, but she doesn't go further than that, I assume, because she got some instructions on what she could actually say.
Is it unusual to hear?
I've covered courts on and off for the last 20 years, more than that. I've never heard of a grand jury foreperson speaking this way. Now, this is a fact-finding grand jury. This is not a charging grand jury, but even still, I've never seen anything like it. If I'm the prosecutor, I'm not sure that I want this media tour taking place because I'm confident that Donald Trump's lawyers are going to use this, just based on what I was hearing last night from people, to try to argue that this is prejudicial in terms of what she's saying.
It was interesting, to Don's point about what Trump came out and said on social media, on Truth Social, thanking the special grand jury, saying total exoneration. And I can't imagine being Fani Willis right now. Like, you've got your foreperson out there as you're trying to make this decision.
But didn't she say, like, did he actually read the documents when he said that?
Well, right. Yeah, I mean, this was not a total exoneration, frankly, any more than the Mueller report was a total exoneration, which he said about that, too. But that's, I think, a separate issue from what the grand jury forewoman is saying. I mean, she's given this extensive media tour. I saw some quotes that I think she gave to the Atlanta Journal-Constitution where she was asked about that quote, where Trump said this is an exoneration, and she started laughing and said, oh, that's fantastic. I love that. I don't see how that's helpful if you're a prosecutor, because Fani Willis still has to, it's not automatic that charges get filed now. That seems like that's the likeliest thing to do. Fani Willis is a very aggressive prosecutor, but this is just, at least in my experience covering courts, not helpful to a district attorney when they are trying to put their case together.
But doing something like this could potentially impact the case, right? The Trump defense attorneys, one of the arguments that they have made about Fulton County is that they argue this is politicized. They say the district attorney is elected, she's trying to appease constituents, which is why she is largely expected to possibly indict the former president. Now they're also going to be able to point to the jury forewoman and be like, hey, she went on national television and said she would be, quote, sad or frustrated if nothing happens here.
When you see the foreperson of the special grand jury granting television and other interviews, is that normal?
No, this is highly abnormal, John. I've never seen this before. I've never seen a scenario where you have a grand juror or a special grand juror going public, talking about the substance of a case before anyone has been, forget about convicted, before anyone has even been charged. And I guarantee you, John, this is causing major headaches for the prosecutors. First of all, she's not allowed to talk about the grand jury's deliberations. She's talking about specific witnesses they saw, what they thought of her. And second of all, bigger picture, John, it really just undermines the seriousness of this. whatever one may think of Donald Trump or anyone else who may be in the crosshairs here, we're talking about indicting people potentially and taking away their liberty. And this gives it a decidedly unserious, almost giddy air that I don't think prosecutors want any part of.
Recently, as the judge kind of created a compromise, that she can't be happy, again, that the foreperson is granting numerous media interviews. When she spoke to my AJC colleagues, she talked about specific witnesses and whether she was delighted by them, whether she felt they were truthful, what they had to offer. And it seems to be great TV, but not necessarily, again, helpful to the case.
This could not be a higher stakes situation for national politics, for local politics. What nobody seems to want is for it to have this sort of goofy element of a foreperson breaking precedent in almost every way and going on TV and just talking about all the things she might remember or could remember, or being coy, reading her body language for what she might be saying. It's a strange situation.
Whether it's this one, whether it's Hunter Biden, in the cases in which the facts have been, the clock has stopped on collecting facts, getting decisions as soon as possible as we get through the campaign is what is necessary. Up next.
I think the foreperson's comments only add more complexity and put more of a burden on the prosecutors because it's a distraction that they have to consider.
Yeah, I mean, just to that point, I mean, former President Trump on Truth Social just today already attacking her in some ways for coming out and speaking. Does it meaningfully complicate what prosecutors are going to be able to do, and does it perhaps offer a boon to the defense attorneys for some of these people who might face indictment?
I think there's no question that it's a boon to defense attorneys. It gives them a hook. It gives them an argument, a story to bring up that they didn't otherwise. I see people, Abby, I see people online, kind of looking through law books and saying, well, technically this is probably not going to be sufficient to quash an indictment. And that's true. But it provides a narrative. I think a narrative that a clever defense attorney can introduce at a trial, for example, via a closing argument or cross-examination, but also I think can be a narrative in the media. I mean, for example, Lisa Page and Peter Strzok had a lot of text messages in the course of the Russia investigation that really were not relevant ultimately to the work of Robert Mueller. But they generated a lot of distraction and were brought up by President Trump and his allies quite a bit. And I expect this foreperson's comments to be brought up quite a bit as well.
Yeah, what an unusual situation to have someone in that role come out so publicly and do all of these interviews. Renato Mariotti, thank you so much.
But look, pull the camera back, Victor. Good Lord. The mere fact that you have the right to do something, and she has a right to speak as a citizen, and even the grand jury rules in Georgia, as long as she's not speaking about deliberations, she's allowed to. The mere fact that you have the right doesn't mean that you ought to do it. And you can create serious problems for a prosecution or a court by speaking publicly. Number one, any defendant who is charged with a crime here can immediately now move to have that indictment thrown out on the basis of saying that, look, Your Honor, even before this was even a case, my client, the grand jury was out there talking about how indictments were coming, dragging the names, teasing that indictments were on the way, and it's impossible to get a fair trial for my client. That she handed them that, and that'll continue through any trial. So there's any number of both legal and practical problems that arise whenever anyone connected to the process goes out and starts talking about deliberations and so on. The problem is that in making this statement, she's undermined the integrity and independence of the grand jury. It now appears that they are just an arm of whether it's the elected prosecutor or sort of political opponents of people who might be charged with crimes. And it just sort of smells bad, even if by the letter of the law, no law was broken by any of those statements. Sure, but here's the problem that is created with a statement like that, Victor. The entire Fulton County, Georgia, could potentially be, anybody in Fulton County who's sort of over the age of 18 can be a potential juror in this trial. They're hearing now evidence that's going to be presented before them at trial and developing opinions about it, developing opinions about defendants. That too can taint the prosecution. If this individual who we're hearing from really wants these people charged with crimes so badly, she better shut her mouth about them, because ultimately she could imperil their convictions if they ever reach that point. And on appeal, after someone's been convicted, that's when attorneys can raise an argument like, hey, look, nothing was fair from the beginning here. on account of the fact that the jury pool was tainted by information that was presented to them even before we got into court. So it's just, again, nothing fatal has happened here right now. I don't want to sound too over the top, but the risks are so great to the process, which is why judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys are so risk averse at this stage.